Did you know there's a species of antelope that can jump higher than a standard dump truck? There's two reasons that this is true. First of all, the antelope has really strong legs. And the second reason is that dump trucks can't jump. I made a decision this morning to tell you that joke. And life is a lot to do with decisions, isn't it? From the moment you wake up until you breathe your last, your days are filled with making decisions, making choices. The story that we're looking at this morning in Daniel chapter 3 is about a decision that some young men had to make. A decision that very, very unlikely any of you will have to make. But people have had to make it throughout history. Last week we talked about, started our introduction to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2, and we discovered that Nebuchadnezzar was what I referred to as a petulant child, and had a dream and wanted to know what the dream meant, and refused to even tell the wise men what the dream was. I didn't want to give anything away, and told them if they didn't not only tell him what the dream was, that he would kill them. And so we talked about the process of dealing with difficult people. So that sort of set the stage for the type of person that Nebuchadnezzar was. In chapter 2, I'm not going to read it to you, but I'm going to summarize the story for you. Nebuchadnezzar has this great idea to build this golden statue of himself. And he puts it up, and he puts this decree down that every time the music plays or the horns blow wherever, everyone has to fall down and worship this magnificent image of himself. And if they don't, this is the sort of, I don't know if it's amusing, but strange part of the story is that he has this fiery furnace, and if you don't fall down, you'll be thrown into the fiery furnace. I don't know how many people in that day and age had fiery furnaces set around, or if he created this fiery furnace just for this one purpose. It's pretty macabre. But nevertheless, that was his decree. And as the story goes on, it turns out that there were some of the wise men who were irritated with the Jews, which is sort of a fact of history since Abraham, isn't it? And went to the king and said, there are some people who are not doing what you say. When the music plays, they don't fall down and worship the image of gold of you, your wonderfulness. And these specifically are these four men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Three men. And they don't pay attention to you, it says in verse number 12. Well, what's curious is that just prior to this, we don't know how much time passed, but just prior to this, they were all in awe of these men because they were Daniel's cohorts, and Daniel had rescued basically all of them from death. But between chapter 2 and chapter 3, time had passed, and their feelings had become less noble toward these Jewish people and became more jealous and irritated. And so they reported this incident. So the king brings them forth and says, what's this I hear about you not willing to fall down and worship me? You better do it. We're going to play the music, and if you don't, you'll be thrown in the fiery furnace. And their response is, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown in the blazing fire, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And if he delivers us, that's great. And if he doesn't, that's great too. We'll still continue to serve him, sort of paraphrasing. And he's furious that they would speak up and refuse to do this. And so he orders the furnace to be heated up 7 times hotter than usual. I don't know how do you figure that? I mean, a furnace is already blazing hot. Somehow he wants it 7 times hotter. It's so hot that literally the soldiers that are carrying them up to throw them in this furnace perish. And then you know the story. He looks in there, and they're wandering around in the fire, and there's now 4 of them. And the story doesn't tell us who the 4th person was. You sort of have to come to your own conclusions as to whether that's an angel in there, whether it's a pre-incarnate theophany of Jesus, to use big technical seminary words, or who it was. But anyway, some being sent from God is there, and they walk out and they don't even smell like smoke, which is astounding. But they don't. And so then the king falls down and worships them and worships their God, and things turn around. So this morning I want to talk to you about the process of making decisions. And as I said, our life is just literally filled with decisions that we make. And for some people, their decisions wrap around the relationship to God. And, well, I guess in the sense that all of us, our decisions reflect how we define God. From the very first moment we wake up, we make decisions that are based on how we view, how we perceive, how we relate, what we believe our relationship to God to be. And that can involve a lot of different things. It can involve decisions that you make as far as how you spend time with him, or whether that's an important part of your day, or whether he's just sort of there and you sense that he's present, but you don't really commune with him. Those are all decisions that you make, perhaps some of them even subconsciously. And then there comes those decisions through the day that maybe you make in a sense of panic, and you suddenly realize that you need to be talking to God. Like maybe you look down, you realize that you didn't know it, but you've been speeding, and you pass a police car, and suddenly you're communing with God quite ardently, very, very interested that God is a part of your life at that moment. There are times when you decide to deliberately ignore God. And let me tell you a story about how I did that. I was coming up to a situation where someone was going to confront me about something, and I knew it was coming, and so I was starting to prepare my case to defend myself. And it went like this. Let me just illustrate it for you in a little sort of skit. Okay, God, this is happening, and this is how I'm planning to lay out my innocence and defend myself. You need to be quiet. No, you don't understand. I have this great defense. I can lay this all out. Don't you think I should make my defense? I really think that my defense is great. I should make this defense. I'm sure I must not have heard you correctly. Are you sure you said don't defend myself? Okay, well, I've got this great story that would illustrate my innocence. Don't tell the story. It's a great story. It'll perfectly illustrate why I'm innocent. Okay, so I get to the situation. It's gone on for quite a long time. I'm beginning to doubt that I heard God. Did he really say not defend myself? He probably didn't mean in this particular situation. He was probably referring in a general sense. So I started defending myself. And then the story came out. I thought, did he really not want me to tell the story? I'm going to tell it. I think it would help. It didn't help. My defending myself didn't help. It went disastrous. And I recall the next time God spoke to me as I was walking back out to my car. I told you to be quiet. I told you not to tell the story. But I decided that I probably didn't hear him correctly. I must not have heard him, even though, as I look back on it, it was very, very clear. So there are times that we simply decide not to pay attention to God, to just sort of ignore him. And the thing about God is he's not persistent in admonishing us or correcting us. He simply tells us, at least in my experiences, he tells me, and then I don't hear another word about it. It's like, can you repeat yourself, please? I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. It's just silence. Because in my heart, I know that I heard him correctly. I just don't want to believe his answer. There are those instances. Another time when we make decisions is perhaps when we're making some sort of a life change, or maybe making some sort of a large purchase. And during those times, different people, depending on how they define God and how they define their relationship, relate to God differently. And it depends somewhat, I suppose, on the seriousness of the decision that you're making. For example, this week I had to replace my laptop. It died. And I didn't even think about praying about it, but I did go talk to Fong. So that's sort of like talking to God, I think, isn't it, in a way? But it just didn't really occur to me. On the other hand, we replaced our car a year ago, and I've sort of adopted this process of making decisions like that, major financial decisions. And the process is that I do a lot of research, And we spend a lot of time in that instance. Gene and I spend a lot of time sitting in cars. We'd just walk from car lot to car lot, and we'd sit in cars. We'd sit there and talk. What do you think about this style of car? What do you think about this size of car? And so we literally spent months narrowing it down till we decided exactly which model and make of vehicle that we wanted to buy. And then I did a lot of research financially, and we looked at our own finances, and I came up with a price. And I spent over a year looking for a car. And one of the things that I do in that decision-making process is they put parameters for God in them, in that decision. And I think that's an important part of this, of making decisions with God, is putting God parameters in there. For example, when I would see a vehicle, I would never call on the same day that I saw it. I always let it sit for at least a day. And I would say, okay, God, if this is the car, you need to make sure that nobody else sees it. And I'm fine with that. I'm comfortable with that. So that's the first parameter I always put in there. The second parameter is that once I have looked at the car, I won't make an immediate decision about it. We'll go away and take some time. So this particular car that came up, I remember seeing it on a Sunday. And by this time, I've been looking for a year, and I'm kind of thinking, yeah, well, it's going to happen someday, whatever. It looked like it fit all the parameters. And let me just say, too, there were two things that we talked about that were accessories that we thought they're not deal breakers, but it'd be kind of nice if they were there. This model car didn't have those features. But I thought, yeah, whatever. Still, everything else, the parameters are there. So we went down and we looked at this car. And we climbed into the front seat, and the first thing we both noticed is that the previous owner had added both of those two things that we wanted. I thought, well, that's pretty sweet. And so we sat down at the table with the salesperson, and I said, okay, this is what I can afford. This is my bottom line right here. I'm willing to pay this much, not a penny more. Not for taxes, not for license. If I leave this lot, it will be paid that much. And he says, okay. So he goes back to his manager, comes back with a counteroffer. And both of us, without a thought, just stood up and started putting our coats on. And I was not disappointed. I was completely content because I trusted that that was part of the parameter that God had set. I didn't have to negotiate with him. This was it. And the salesman said, where are you going? I said, well, you made us an offer. Wasn't where we could fit, but that's okay. Appreciate your time. He goes, wait a minute, we're not done. I said, we're not done? I said, no, we're not done. So he came back with the exact offer that I originally said, and we actually drove home with a car. I never imagined that would happen. So in those kinds of decisions that you're making, I think that it's really important, as I said, to set in God parameters. If they're really significant decisions, you want God's input, then give God room to work in the decision. Whether you're looking for a car, whether you're looking for a job, whether you're entering into relationships, put God parameters in there. And, we can talk in Sunday school perhaps more about what that means. But lastly, I want to talk about the more serious decision that these men had to make that hopefully none of you will ever have to make. I remember, I don't remember how long ago it was, but some time ago there was a massacre in a mall in Africa. And the gunman went from person to person and asked them to quote portions of the Quran. And if they could not quote them, then they would execute them. And I remember thinking what it would be like for a young person who had grown up a Muslim and knew all the passages but had converted to Christianity. And realizing at that moment they had to make a decision. Do I quote what is very familiar to me? And I'm not, in a sense, you could say you're not denying your faith. I'm simply quoting something that I know. But in the back of your mind, you know also that you're denying the fact that you're no longer a follower of Islam. How would you respond to that? How would you respond in that situation? And part of your response would be determined by, again, how you define God. And I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong scenario in that situation. Fast forward to the massacre that happened in Oregon last year. And in that situation, in that community college in Oregon, the gunman pointed a gun at people and said, "Are you a Christian?" Literally pointed the gun at the first person. I'm sure had no idea what the right answer was and said yes. The second person knew. And the third person knew without a doubt. what answering that question yes would mean. It was a matter of life or death. And again, their answer was determined by how they defined God. And let me just say that I'm not convinced that there's a right or wrong answer in this. Some of you would say one answer is correct. Some of you would say another answer is correct. And those of you that felt like taking the stand would probably use verses like, if you deny me before my father, or before people, I will deny you before my father. And for you, your definition of God is very black and white. Other people's definition of God, there's grayness there, there's ambiguity. What do you have a responsibility to tell the truth to someone that's about to execute you? What if it was the situation where you were defending your family? What if they were about to execute your spouse or your grandchildren, your children? Would it be okay then to say, no, I'm not a Christian, to save other people's lives? So where is this place of defining it? It would be nice if I could give you a clear answer and say, this is what you need to do in every one of those situations. But those huge situations simply illustrate how we define God on a smaller scale, in smaller decisions. And I think what's important for me to say to you this morning is that every one of us, outside of the essentials, outside of those facts which we cling to, which we hold most dear, we all have a slightly different definition of what it means to be in a relationship to Creator. And outside of that narrow focus, all those perspectives have probably some value, some worth. And every single one of us have some perceptions that are wrong, I assure you, because God is unfathomable. He is larger than you can ever imagine. He has more components to him than we can ever see. I was listening to a lecture this week, and someone was talking about our view of God and how it's like the difference between having a two-dimensional and a three-dimensional existence. And in a two-dimensional existence where all you have is width and height, you have no depth. When you see a round object coming toward you, if you can imagine this in your mind, the first thing you see is a tiny spot. And then the spot starts growing larger, turns into a circle, and the circle gets larger and larger, starts shrinking back down again, turns into a spot and disappears. Because you have no depth. All you can see is one point in that all the way along. As three-dimensional people, we can see the total thing. But scientists now believe there are at least 11 different dimensions that they can prove mathematically. So what does that mean for a person who's three-dimensional? There's 11 dimensions. You see, that's just unfathomable, but you see, God exceeds that. He is more vast than that. He's more complicated than that. And the point in this is that you need to come to a clear understanding of what you believe about God, and you need to constantly challenge yourself about that, constantly stretch yourself about that, and make your decisions in line with how you perceive him, how you define God. And you also need to let other people define him as they do too. You know, I keep going back and thinking about Lillian's disco ball. You know, it sparkles from so many different directions, so many different parameters. So we are satisfied, we are content with how I define God, how I relate to him, and I love you for how you do as well. And I don't judge you for how you do as well. After the essentials, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the bare essentials. Jesus Christ is the only way. He's the Son of God. He is the source of our salvation. And it's through him that God rescues us. So this morning, a decision to welcome God into more of the decisions of your life, set up godly parameters, to continue to seek to understand this amazing, mysterious being that we worship, who's not body but has a body, who's male and female, who's all things and small things and great things and large things, but who destines and designs and desires to have an intimate personal relationship with me and with you. Choose for him. Stand and let me pray for us. God, you are truly amazing and magnificent and wonderful, and we love you, and we love each other, and we celebrate our diversity and our different perspectives on who you are. And we ask you to bring us together and to you in that, and continue to mold us and shape us into the perfect reflection of you and of the love that you have for humanity and for us. Pray that for us all in Jesus' name. Amen.